First things first. Yes, you do have an amazing story. And yes, you can tell it. How do I know? It's what I do. And I'm going to show you how you can do it. Hey, I'm Eliya. I'm a storyteller and a marketing consultant. And I believe your personal stories are your most powerful assets and the gateway to the rest of your marketing. Your stories humanize you and they capture your audience and draw them in a faster and more natural way than any other tactic or strategy on the market. I guarantee it. The problem is that we've overcomplicated the process of storytelling and marketing so much that people are afraid that they can't do it or that they don't have a good story to tell. But here's the thing. Storytelling doesn't have to be about a grand hero's journey. We can leave that to Disney and Pixar. I'm going to show you my super simple framework that makes storytelling as simple and as natural as it is to you as the human being that you are, because it's something that we actually all know to do. And this exact framework I've used to get over 500,000 reach on social media organically, and also to rank #1 on Google and to get published in the top magazine in my niche. But it's also been the framework that has helped entrepreneurs to really get grounded in their own sense of self in their business and marketing, in their brand, in their values, and how they want to show up in the world in the rest of their marketing. And the concept of this framework is so simple. That's the whole point. We're going to find tiny moments with powerful meaning. Let's dive in. So the process of telling your story really does begin with making the decision to actually tell it, which is oftentimes the hardest thing for us to do. We're afraid to be vulnerable. We're afraid to share pieces of ourselves that feel scary to share. And sometimes we just don't want to share without having an intention or a purpose behind sharing. And all of these are really valid. So the caveat to this whole thing is that you have to choose the stories that you're going to tell and why you're going to tell them. And that's going to be a personal decision for everyone. But the key is that it has to be right for you. Because if it's not right for you, it's not going to land. The other piece here is that how valuable your story is not measured by what you think about the story. It's measured by how it impacts other people. So one of the things to keep in mind as you make this decision to tell your story is that your story can be someone else's survival guide. And our stories, that's what they're meant to do in the world. They're meant to help other people and share knowledge through our experiences, which is why they're so powerful in marketing. But the decision to tell your story is going to be yours. The decision about what stories you tell is completely yours. This is a very intimate and personal journey that you have to go on. It all begins right here. You have to start by determining what is the reason that you want to tell this story and what is the lesson that you want to teach with this story. So we might tell stories for all kinds of reasons. We might tell them to share a belief that we hold. We might tell them to help people understand our journey a little bit better. We might tell them in pivotal places in our customer journey to help actually shift beliefs for other people. There are going to be a ton of reasons to tell your stories, but you have to understand that piece first. And inside of that piece, there's going to be a lesson that you want the story to reveal and teach. And you have to know these two pieces when you begin. Otherwise, your stories are going to fall flat and become just noise. They're not going to have any purpose behind them. So like everything else we do in marketing, your storytelling also needs to be really intentional in what you're doing and why you're doing it. Once we can understand that, it becomes really simple. All stories have to have one reason, one lesson, and then we find a single moment that defines that lesson for you in your life. And then we put 3 key elements into the story itself. And this is what makes up a story. You start out with the reason and the lesson, you find the moment, and then you have these 3 key elements that we're going to walk through. And so these 3 key elements really encompass the storytelling framework that I teach and that I use. And every single story on the planet, whether it is one of Disney's most incredible creations, and they're the masters at storytelling, or whether it's a story that you tell with a friend, over a glass of wine, or share with, a partner of something that's really deep and vulnerable. Every story has the same key elements in it, and this is what they are. It starts with a character at a poignant moment of transformation in their life. That moment of transformation is filled with human emotions. There's all kinds of strife and struggle. There's joy, there's sadness, there's inspiration, and there's just a huge gamut of emotions that go into any moment of transformation. And then they also have tons of detail, and the detail has a really important part that it plays in the story. But all stories have these three core elements in them to make really beautiful and compelling stories. So, not the whole hero's journey that you usually see, just three really simple pieces to any good story. So I'm going to take you through each one, teach you how I break them down, and how you can utilize them in your storytelling. The first one is a moment of transformation, and every story needs a good character and it needs a good struggle. And struggle happens in these pivotal moments of transformation, is where we go from struggle to a new belief or a new lesson or a new outcome in life. And which is why I bring it down to a single moment of transformation. So when you know what the lesson is that you want to teach, when you know what the reason is that you're telling your story, we go looking for the single tiny, tiny, tiny moment of transformation where you learned this lesson in your own life, where this became something really important to you. And that is what the entire story becomes based around. And so we look at this moment of transformation. We say, like, what was the catalyst for the lesson? And the smaller you can get into that moment, the better. So the more micro that you can get in the situation and inside the story, the more captivating the story is going to be. So we want to get tiny, tiny, tiny here. And what you have to understand in doing this is that you are not necessarily one huge journey. You are an accumulation of all of these tiny little moments in time. And that's what makes up who we are as our identity, our beliefs, our values, our systems, our businesses, is that it comes down to a bunch of these tiny moments. So the practice is in getting into the tiny moments where things really shifted for you. And so we can look at this of, what was the moment, what I always call the bathroom floor moment, which for most entrepreneurs, there's a moment that everything kind of falls apart and you make the decision to do something different that eventually will lead to great success in your business. Every entrepreneur on the planet has a story like that. For each of us, they're very different, but they act as the catalyst for some kind of eventual success. And I call it the bathroom floor moment because for a lot of us, it happens on the bathroom floor, it happens on the kitchen floor, it happens on the bedroom floor, right? Where we kind of crumble into a pile and the whole world seems to be falling apart. And it is what sparks something new. And there are tons of moments like that in your life. And so we want to be looking for the small moments. So you need to find out exactly what that is for the lesson and the reason that you're telling the story. And you need to go to this moment and really sit in it. And you need to get really clear on what that exact moment looked and felt like, because it's going to be the focus of the story. So the first thing is to find the moment and really sit in it and recall as much as you can about this one little moment in time. Then the story really unfolds as a journey, right? So it becomes the focus, but the rest of the story unfolds into how you get to this moment, really, again, dropping into the moment itself, and then how it transforms you and what happens after the moment. And those three components start to pull the whole journey, or what we would consider the hero's journey or the story arc, together. So once we've got that tiny moment in time, the next two kind of core pieces of it are really what bring that moment to life and what makes that moment something that other people can see and understand and feel. And so the first one is emotion, because emotion is obviously the thing that connects us all as human beings. And so you want to really go through the gamut of emotions that happened inside that single, small, tiny moment. And these can be negative emotions, positive emotions, and everything in between. So we're really looking at a few key layers to these emotions. So the first one is the outward experience of emotions. And so you want to be speaking to or writing to the external manifestations of internal feelings. And so this is obviously things like shuddering, shaking, crying, jumping, all the ways that we externally emote. And then you also want to make sure that you're speaking to the inner core emotions. So these are the emotions that are creating these outward experiences, right? What is it that you're feeling and how are you feeling that internally? What are the sensations that's bubbling up or pushing down, or any of the whole range of emotions that we feel as humans. And then the real secret sauce in the emotional piece here is that you want to get to shared emotions. And so the shared emotions are the things that all humans experience, no matter race, sexual orientation, gender, identification, anything, no matter who you are on the planet, there are emotions that we all experience as humans. And you want to make sure in your story to get down to those emotions. And this is really crucial because it basically allows somebody else to see in you what they know to be true in themselves, right? And so it's what can I share with you about myself that I know that you will resonate with? And this creates like a really quick and deep connection. So you want to be aware of what are the emotions that we all experience as humans, and can you speak to those? And there are some ones at the kind of core of who we're being, right? Worthiness being a really core emotion that we all struggle with and wrangle with. So you want to make sure that you do touch on those and get down there. And what happens is that at the intersection of this moment of transformation and infusing it with emotion, this is where true connection really happens, right? And that's why this is one of the key pillars that we want to include in the story, because again, it's this thing of, I have been through something and experienced something that possibly you have also. And it's opening up the pathway. This is why it's the gateway to everything else. It's opening that pathway for communication and connection. So this emotional piece is one of the core elements that really supports and brings life to your moment of transformation. The other piece that becomes really important is in the details that we use around this moment of transformation. And so details, we look at them in three sort of layers here. The first one is, how can we speak about the level of detail surrounding this moment of transformation that helps someone really dive into the story. Walt Disney has a method of this that's really brilliant. When they designed the Disney parks, Walt Disney was someone who was incredibly aware of detail and how that helped immerse somebody into the experience of being in a park. And so he was so intentional about the way that he did this, that we can take what they did with the Disney parks and use it in how we think about stories. And so what he did was he designed the Disney park so that if you're flying over the top of a Disney park, you can recognize it as a Disney park, right? So the way the park is laid out, obviously the use of all the Mickey Mouse symbols everywhere in the gardening, the way that the castle is situated in the middle, the way they use the cobblestone streets, right? All of these things help you identify from way up in the sky that it's a Disney park. And we can do the same thing in your story by setting the scene for the moment of transformation from that way up high level. And that helps for someone to understand the context of where this is happening. And you want to think about it like, if I was standing, 3,000 feet above where this moment of transformation occurred, how would I describe the scene? Because something that takes place at the end of a quiet neighborhood looks very different from something that takes place in the middle of the night in a junkyard. Those are two very different scenes. So that's the first thing you want to be thinking about, is from 3,000 feet above, like, what did this moment of transformation really look like? And then Disney wanted to make sure that when you're in the park itself, you're aware of all the details as well. And so he made sure that from that eye level, you could get super immersed into it. And so again, the windows on the buildings were in the shape of Mickey Mouse. The ironwork on the gates also had certain shapes to it. Everything has this sort of cartoonish kind of otherworldly feel and look to it, right? The wallpapers inside of all the buildings was all different. And so the same thing in your story, that at eye level inside your moment of transformation, if you can really describe what that looks like, again, sets a scene, right? If we're talking about a story where you are sitting on your couch and the morning light is streaming in and there's hot coffee, right? The steam is coming out of the hot coffee. That's a really different setting, really different context from, the middle of the night, and you can barely see. For some reason, you're absolutely drenched from head to foot. There's a chill running through your body and the steam is coming out off your breath, right? So this level of detail is crucial for setting the scene and giving context to the story. The third level of detail that Disney put into everything that he did was the way that the park feels under hand and foot was incredibly intentional. So every single doorknob at Disney had a different shape. So the way it feels in your hand is incredibly different. the cobblestone underneath your feet with the ridges, the difference in the smooth from the rough. This was all incredibly intentional in the way he designed it. And so again, we can do the same thing as you tell your story inside the moment of transformation. How did things really feel under hand and foot, right? The weight of a warm and cozy blanket, the heat that radiates from the sun coming through the window, the warmth of your hand on the coffee cup is incredibly different from, raindrops that, roll down your back in this really icy cold way. And, the feel of maybe some metal or some steel against your skin and how cold that is. It sticks in the cold. That is incredibly different, and it sets a totally different scene, totally different story, totally different context, and allows someone to really be dropped into and become immersed by the story that you're telling, just as is the case in Disney. The whole point is that you go into this world and you become totally immersed by the world, and it's a whole experience. It's a whole total complete visceral experience. We want to try to mimic that in the way that you tell your stories. And when you do this and you do it really well, what you're really doing is adding texture and depth to your stories. And if you really use all the senses, right? How did things hear? How did they sound? How did they smell? The taste of things, if you can add these things in, the feeling on the skin, the feeling from inside the body, this all adds texture and depth to your story. And it really is what makes a story come alive. So inside that moment of transformation, adding all this depth and texture is the key to helping the whole story kind of become robust and full and alive. And the final thing about the details in your story is adding comparisons. And comparisons are incredibly powerful for helping me to understand your experience without being there. So can we add similes? Can we use comparisons of things that you might know, right? The warm sun, everybody kind of knows the experience of the warm sun on the first day of spring and how just luxurious that is, right? Cold, everybody knows what it's like to get wet in a cold setting and how that lingers with you and gets the chill in your bones, right? Everybody knows those kinds of experiences. And so in doing that, you really allow for someone to understand something that they may not otherwise be able to understand. And those become really important in telling this story. So when we put these three key elements together, what we really get is that at the intersection of the moment of transformation, when you really add the detail in there, it allows us to capture and hold the attention of somebody else. So storytelling is a co-creative process, meaning as you tell the story, somebody else's brain is actually creating and bringing that story to life at the same time. The easier that we make this for the brain to do, the longer and the more effectively we can hold attention. And we do that by adding these layers of detail so that the brain is working at really building the scene, really building the setting. And everybody is on the fight, right? On the hunt for grabbing and holding attention. And adding these layers and levels of details into the moment of transformation is one of the ways that we do that. When you add the detail into the emotional piece, so when you are explaining these emotions in great levels of detail from all these different layers with all this texture, you are sort of biohacking the brain and saying, oh, we have something that's creating an emotional response, right? Because the person consuming that story is going to be feeling it in their body. So, okay, I'm having an emotional response to this. And that is the way that the brain says, this is important information. We need to remember this for a long time. And so you're biohacking the memory of the brain by really helping someone to feel the same emotions that you were potentially feeling in your story. What it then comes down to is that a story is just a character at a moment of transformation. And we take that catalyst moment, that small, tiny, minute moment, we really fill it full of detail. We really speak to the emotions that were going on during that moment. And in that, we can connect really organically, captivating people and holding their attention. And we're becoming part of their memory. We are becoming part of the system in the brain that is designed to remember things that are emotionally charged. And not only that, but storytelling is our most natural form of communication. It's how we know ourselves in space and time. It's how we have known and related to each other since the dawn of time, sitting around campfires, telling stories of survival, telling stories of where to hunt, telling stories of what to avoid, telling stories of everything is how we've come to know ourselves as humans. And so it is the most natural form of communication for us as humans, and the easiest easiest way to begin to create connection, which if you're in the business of marketing for creating connection specifically between other human beings as human beings, your stories are how we do that. That's 100% how we begin the conversation. So when we have these pieces, that the overall framework for telling a story just becomes really, really easy. All stories obviously start with a hook. You can do a hook in a ton of different ways. You can ask an interesting question. You can go right to the action of the story and then pull back out of it. You can use different literary techniques. It's just about kind of piquing somebody's interest and holding them captive within that first 3 to 5 seconds of a story. And then we can get into life before the moment of transformation. So what was happening? What was the struggle? What wasn't working? What's the dissonance that's going on in life that led you to this moment? And then we really get into the bulk of the story, which is this beautiful micro moment in time, this moment of transformation that is a catalyst for something really great and wonderful that comes out of it. And again, this becomes the bulk of the story. And that leads into how that changed things, right? How then life changed, how we found ease in places that we had hardship before, how we found joy in places there was struggle, how we found love in places when there was loneliness, all these kinds of things. The life after the moment of transformation is really where the lesson is revealed, which is why we have to start with that in mind. So that is a super simple, super basic storytelling framework that anybody can use and implement. Again, using these moments of transformation is not something that's, mind-blowing, and it's not rocket science. It really is how we come to know each other, and how we naturally tell stories is in these tiny moments that make up our life. That is what we do naturally. But when you put it into a framework like this very intentionally, that's when it becomes sort of your superpower. So where do you begin? Again, you begin with the end in mind. You start to ask yourself, what are the beliefs that I hold? Why do I do things the way that I do them? What led me to having these beliefs? How did I get here? And inside of that, looking for the tiny moments that have become the full picture of who you are and how you begin in the world. And then making the decision on what the moment of transformation is, and then building it out. So starting always with the end in mind, always telling stories intentionally, making the decision that you're just going to tell the story and let other people decide the value of that story, because for some people it will be their survival guide, and for other people it'll be inconsequential. So that's not up to you to decide. Really, you make the decision to tell the story and let it impact other people as it can, because at the end of the day, once you put a story out into the world, it takes on a life of its own. And that's really a beautiful and also cathartic process. So my purpose here is really to give you the tools to do what you naturally do, but to do it in an intentional way. It is just the starting point to everything else that we can do, and all the other stories that we can tell, where you're making the impact that you want to make through your personal experiences and bringing who you are to the table and humanizing yourself and your brand, opening up for connection and using storytelling as the gateway to the rest of your marketing. I give this to you in the hopes you will utilize it, in the hopes you will tell your stories, in the hopes it will make an impact. I don't ask for anything in return. If you need more support from me, you can always check out my website, www.heyeliya.com, where there's lots of other resources, and as well as events, workshops, offers, ways to work with me one-on-one. But this is the gateway to everything that I do, and starting right here in knowing and telling your story.